Well, I'm going to relabel this tonight as how to help discouraged parents, because that's really what we're looking at, because our parents are so discouraged at times. So let's have a word of prayer and ask the Lord to give us wisdom. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you that we can open it and find resources. And Lord, we just ask that as we try to help others, that you give us wisdom to find the right instructions in your word, that we could apply it well. We just ask for help, Lord, in all of this. Bless those who are still coming, protect them. And Father, we ask that you bless those who are on Zoom with us tonight. And we just thank you for that as well. In Jesus' name, amen. Are you amazed how well the streets are running now? I just was thinking tonight how the work crews have just been awesome. Just the streets plowed, and they were up today. Our little streets, Gate and Green, first they plowed 2 little ribbons either direction, and with the snow in the middle. They didn't know where to put it. And then they back and come and clear that out today. So, and yesterday. So it's just, I'm really thankful for that. Okay. I want to mention to you in your notes there the inevitable failure of every parent. I don't know if you have spoken with a lot of parents about their way of bringing up their kids, especially as we get older and our children are out of the nest and they begin to make their own decisions. We always feel guilty. In fact, when I would discipline my children, I cried harder than they did, literally. I hated disciplining my children. I remember one time, Dan had taken a bottle of medicine. A kid next door offered him some pills. And we'd always said, never take any kind of medicine from anybody else. So he grabbed it and threw it over his head. Well, went through a window, broke another neighbor's window. And so he came home and I said, son, you're going to have to pay for that window. I said, I can't believe you were so careless, and I'm going to have to punish you for that. Well, after I gave him a little paddling, he's, tears in his eyes, and I'm down the floor with my arm around him, and I'm crying. And I said, so Dan, you know why I had to do this, and I love you. And he said, Dad, you didn't listen to me. I said, what do you mean? He says, I didn't take it to throw it through a window. I was trying to protect John next door. And I threw it over my head and it accidentally broke the window. I said, oh, and I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. And then, of course, my eyes were redder than ever. He said, will you forgive me? He says, that's okay, Dad. Nobody's perfect. But we always feel guilty. I was too harsh, or I was too lenient. I didn't spend enough time with them. I focused on my career instead of my children. I couldn't provide for them the way I should have. I spoiled them by giving them too much. I didn't teach them how to work. I demanded too much of them. And for those of you who are interested in counseling, and I'm assuming some of you are interested in helping out in that ministry, we need to know how to help discouraged parents, because that's what happens. There's just this feeling of guilt. We never can do enough for them. We make wrong decisions too many times. And I don't know of any parents that cannot look back on their child rearing days and not feel some guilt. I shouldn't have spoken this way. I shouldn't have done this. Shouldn't have been so harsh. It's just that feeling that comes over us. I failed, but I want to remind people that God, the very first father, failed as a parent, if indeed the parent is totally responsible for how the child turns out. Then God failed, but he didn't. And I even hate to put a sentence out like that. I feel guilty about that. But if the parent is totally responsible for how a child turns out, then we have to look at our first parents. And the fact of the matter is, we have people in every church who have done everything well as parents. I mean, at least most things well. They're good parents, of course, not perfect, none are, but as a general rule, really good parents. And yet they've got some kids that turn out poorly. We know a couple who they had one child in the ministry, and then they had another daughter that was doing real well, and then one of the daughters went off the deep end and just totally walked away for a time. And he was an elder in his church, and then he resigned from it because he felt he had failed so much. God's word tells us in 1 Timothy 3, verse 5, the parent is required to control his children while they live at home. Because once they get out of the house, they are not technically under our control anymore. When they're small, we can control them with our voices and sometimes with punishment if it's required. But it says in 1 Timothy 3, verse 4 and 5, he must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how would he care for God's church? And as adults, when they become adults, they're held responsible for their own behavior and decisions, and you have to let them. And there's a time parents want to protect their children from, even when they're adults, want to protect them from all the pressures of our world and all the failures, etc. And you can't do it, especially if they are out making their own decisions that we recognize that's not a wise decision, that's a harmful decision. And so we find universal problems with children. The heart of mankind is rebellious and sinful. This is universal. The heart of mankind is rebellious and sinful. Romans 3 tells us all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 2, hear, O heavens, give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. Children have I reared and brought up, but they have rebelled against me. That's God speaking, I believe. So you look at that, and he's saying they've rebelled against me. I brought them up. I've done well with it, but they've rebelled. So the heart of mankind is rebellious and sinful, and human beings are inherently foolish. A fool despises his father's instruction, but whoever heeds reproof is prudent. Proverbs 15, verse 5. We just, so many times, and I think all of us would have to confess the decisions we've made. So many times we look back and say, that was foolish. That was a poor decision. And we need to cut our children some slack as well. But get this, children are inherently ungrateful. You know, that you hear that statement, you know, they want to go their own way. And sometimes we have to say, wait, as long as you live in my house, this is what you're going to do. And it's like, what, your house? It's like, yeah, it's my house. I'm paying the bills. And but they're ungrateful about that their food is provided, warmth in a home is provided, and they're ungrateful for all that they have. And the advantages, especially in America, boy, we have such spoiled people, and we are of that same ilk, very spoiled. Come in. Okay, thank you. So they're inherently ungrateful. And you find in Proverbs 19, verse 26, he who does violence to his father and chases away his mother is a son who brings shame and reproach. And you find Absalom in 2 Samuel, how ungrateful he was and how he tried to steal the hearts of Israel and succeeded in many ways. I mean, he really did. Ultimately, he failed in that, but he almost was able to carry off this coup against his father, and he would have killed his father in order to get what he wanted. He was willing and very much willing to kill his brothers and all, but he was ungrateful for all the advantages he had as a prince of Israel. That wasn't enough. We find people that are ungrateful here in the U.S., especially for food and clothing, shelter. When we were in Uganda, we saw absolute poverty. We were with some people. I preached in some of the small little churches there where they just have mud floors. Preached one day and it was raining outside. The roof was corrugated steel that had holes in it, was reused, you know. And there was a stream running down the middle of the church from the rain up above because it was down lower and there was a hill coming toward it. And I saw such poverty, and then we saw some of the homes that people live in there, in this community, so to speak. And they're houses that are just huts, is all they are, mud huts. No plumbing of any kind. They have to go down and carry water back. No plumbing of any kind inside, you know. So they don't have just basic sanitation. I saw a mother washing her little baby in a ditch down by the road, and that ditch is full of sewage, and she's trying to wash her baby in that. And you can see why the life expectancy there is so low. But let me tell you, if you gave them something, Marla brought some eyeglasses when we went over there, and there was a woman who couldn't read her Bible anymore because she couldn't see. And Marla gave some glasses out, and she didn't even know how to put it on. She put them on upside down. But eventually she got them right, and she could read. She could see. I was so thankful, so grateful. And we saw the meals that are prepared for these people, just beans and rice. You know, they get that if they get a meal, sometimes 3 times a day. And sometimes the rice has little pebbles in it, and they can break their teeth on that. It's very hard. Almost no meat at all. Marla was teaching in one class for the ladies, and about 100 women there, I think. And there was a classroom next door with a rooster, and it was crowing at the beginning of her lecture. And I said, "Do you think you'll be able to be heard over that?" She said, "I guess I'll have to yell." Well, a few minutes into her lecture, it suddenly stopped. And that day they had chicken in the beans and rice. Can you imagine trying to feed? Well, they had how many? 415 people. What a rooster wouldn't go very far, but they were thankful for that. But we are so ungrateful. I'm grateful for their parents' employment and hard work. There are some of one of the men last week that I know worked over 80 hours, wasn't it? I think it was over 80 hours. And it's not unusual for him to do that. He's on call constantly. He just works so hard, and it's easy for children to not appreciate that. You know, well, that's his job. And they're ungrateful for their parents' love often. So this is part of the problem. But God has a view for rebellious children, or of rebellious children. He teaches that they're rebelling against himself, against God himself. And the honor of parents, according to the word of God, is non-negotiable. We're told in Matthew 15, verses 4-6, "For God commanded, honor your father and mother, and whoever reviles father and mother must surely die. But you say, if anyone tells his father or his mother, what you would have gained from me is given to God, that he need not honor his father. So for the sake of your tradition, you've made void the word of God." They had a tradition that they could declare what they would use to support their parents, because no welfare plan. It's the children who had to support their parents and take care of them. So there's no retirement and all, but they would say, well, I can't do this because we're giving that money to the church, to the temple, for their use and all. And the Lord says, you are breaking this commandment, and God holds them accountable. It's interesting that in God's word, it doesn't say the parents necessarily are honorable, but they're to be honored, you know, as parents. So if you have a father or mother that is not everything that a child wants it to be, there's some embarrassment or something like that, Doesn't matter. According to God, you are supposed to honor your father and mother. And this is something that we need to teach parents, that you're to hold your children to honor you. We're just, it says that again in that passage where we read in 1 Timothy, and that he is to see that the children honor and obey. And in Ephesians chapter 6, it especially points it out to the children themselves, that this is the first commandment of the promise, to honor your father and mother, that it may go well with you and you may live long in your land. So God holds them accountable, and to honor their parents, to dishonor their parents has severe consequences. In Deuteronomy 21, the parents shall say to the elders of the city, this our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He's a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall purge evil from your midst, and all Israel shall hear and fear. We have no record in God's word that anyone did this. But God is trying to say to them, you've got to stamp this out, and you need to make this something that the town joins with you, the people round about you. Well, we don't have that in our day. Come in. We don't have that in our day, but I've tried to share with people, would you prefer to discipline your children or have the police do it? You know, I mean, those are your choices. If you don't discipline your children and they get away with dishonoring parents and all authority, when they come time to meet with a police officer, pulls them over and they show him some lip and they're very dishonoring to him, they're going to pay a price. And if they don't do what the officer says to do, you know, either stay in your car or get out of your car or whatever, and the kid cops an attitude, don't be surprised if the police officer says, get out of the car, turn around, and handcuffs them. And sometimes down in the dirt. I mean, it depends on the police officer, but I would rather discipline a child myself than to have the state do that. So there are severe consequences. Deuteronomy 27, cursed be anyone who dishonors his father and mother, and all the people shall say, amen. And that's when they were gathered as a large group, and he was teaching them this, and they said, yeah, we agree. They also are not still under the promise of God's blessing. That's in Ephesians 6. It says, honor your father and mother. This is first commandment with a promise that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. That's part of the promise. But if they don't do that, they're not under that promise. And God may, out of his mercy, still bless them because of the prayers of their parents or whatever. That's not to say they can't repent and turn it around, but it's a very serious thing. Well, there's a biblical plan for raising our children, and we're quickly going to look through that tonight, and I want to give time for Marlo to share some things. But we're to prepare the next generation. That's the point of being a parent, is to prepare the next generation, first of all, to enter heaven when they die. Now, we should make it our goal to see that our children are going to be in heaven with us. 1 Thessalonians 2, we're exhorting and encouraging and imploring each of you as a father would his own children, so that you would walk in a manner worthy of the God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. This is something we're to do, generally speaking, and pastors are to teach, and teachers are to teach, and fellow laborers are to teach one another that we are to walk in a manner worthy of God, just as you would your own children. So that's one of the first goals, prepare the next generation, and then prepare them to live a joyful, abundant, and fruitful life here on earth. Again, Ephesians 6, 1 through 3, that this first commandment was a promise that it may go well with you, you may enjoy long life. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 at verse 12, I know that there's nothing better for men than to be happy and to do good while they live, that everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God. And we want to encourage them to understand, if you walk with God, you can have joy in your life. Even in your work, it can be a joy to you. And so you try to teach them that, to have a joyful, abundant, and fruitful life on earth. And then you teach them to walk with God in obedience during their lifetime. And we're going to look in a few minutes in Deuteronomy chapter 6, but verses 1 through 3, where he talks about how we're to go about this. Let me just go over this even here. These are the commands, decrees, and laws that the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you're crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees, commands that I give you, so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, O Israel, be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, that you may increase greatly in the land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord your God, the God of your fathers, promised. Well, then God tells us how to do this. And this is, you see, as if you're counseling discouraged parents, there are many who do not know this. We have a Bible study on Tuesday morning, where some of the folks who come, I think, do not know the Lord. Others are just, if they do know the Lord, are just babies in Christ. I have a couple of Catholic ladies who come. And I invited someone, the snow gives you opportunities to speak with people in the neighborhood. So I invited folks right next to us to come to our Bible study. And they said, well, we're Catholic, and I know you don't use the Catholic Bible. And so, the point was we just couldn't come. And one of our Catholic ladies, who has accepted the Lord since she started coming to a study, says, why would they be like that? I bought my Bible in the Catholic Church, and but it's still fine for me, and we don't know if she meant the Catholic. I don't think she meant the Douay version. I think she meant a more modern one. But she said she has since accepted Christ and is growing, but she just couldn't believe these Catholic people would stay away from it. So, and then another lady, Catholic, right behind us, she comes. She loves the study. She just loves it, and we can't tell. I think she certainly believes in God, and she believes that Jesus is the Savior, as Catholics do. Whether she knows him personally, we have some real questions. She knows about him, but whether she knows him personally, we don't know. But she keeps coming. She loves it. Well, God tells us how to raise godly children as best we can. That the older generation must prepare the younger generation for eternity. That's right. Proverbs 22, verse 6 says, train up a child. Marla may talk about that later on. Are you talking about that? Okay. Joel 1 through 3 says, tell your sons about it. Let your sons tell their sons, and their sons the next generation. It's just to pass on the things of God. And then one of the things you want to do and to encourage people, if you're counseling, is to encourage your children toward biblical marriage, because many people do not understand that, especially the latest generation. They don't think a thing about it. They're just going to live with whomever they choose and have relations with anyone they choose, because they don't see anything wrong with it. They've been told there's nothing wrong with it. And yet in their heart, I think it does bother them. And you talk about people who are unbelievers, and they think, open marriage is fine until it hits them and their mate or their current boyfriend, girlfriend cheats on them. And I'm sitting there going, how can they cheat on you if you think it's okay for you to do that? Because their heart says, I want them to exclusively love me. It's just natural. This program, Sister Wives, I don't know if you've seen any part of it where the wives are very unhappy. 5 of them or something like that now, I believe, 4 or 5. But they're very unhappy, and especially the first wife. Just she's so depressed and so unhappy. They're taught by some of their twisted doctrine that it's okay, but we need to teach our children biblical marriage. Matthew 19, verse 4 through 6. Haven't you read that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and he said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh, so they're no longer two but one. Therefore what God has joined together, let no man separate. This addresses the whole issue of the multiple genders that they're saying out there. God says very clearly, male and female. That's it. And he goes on, this whole idea of transgenderism. God made them male and female. That's not negotiable for Christians. I mean, biblical Christians. There are a lot of people who call themselves Christians who are not Christian. And so they want to reinterpret the Bible, and they want to say, well, I don't see anything wrong with this. Then read the scriptures. That's like when you hear about, there was a pastor out in Seattle who was called by the news media the cursing pastor. May have heard about him. And when some of these young pastors have been confronted, I think one of the young men said to a pastor that I know, he said, where in the Bible does it say you can't curse or cuss? Well, it's all over the place. And James especially addresses that very issue. He says, out of the mouth should not come both blessing and cursing. It's very clear that our speech ought to be honorable to the Lord and acceptable to the Lord. But they just think, no, it's perfectly all right to curse in the pulpit, let alone cursing at all. They think that's all right. So we need to teach them about that, but hear about biblical marriage, even though they don't understand it. We had a couple come years ago where we were ministering, and they came first for a few weeks and then accepted the Lord. Remember Marcy? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they came and they finally came to me and said, we didn't know that we had to get married. We didn't know this was sinful. Now, I tend to think they did know, but they weren't admitting it to themselves. But they said, we need to get married. And I said, let's go. Let's get you married. And it's just interesting how the Lord wants people to respond, and God's word will convict. And that's exactly what happened. And then we need to follow God's blueprint for parenting. And we're going to give you some thoughts on that. Deuteronomy 6, verses 5 through 7. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. I mean, it's every part of the day is to be a time to instruct your children. Before they go off to school, you want to ask as parents that you're counseling, do you have devotions with your children before they go off to school? We felt that they needed that booster shot each morning. And we had a mother that wanted Marla to babysit just before they went to school. Her kids, she had to go to work earlier. So she brought them to our house. And we said, come on, sit down. We're having devotions now. And they loved it. They loved the Bible stories and all. We would go through that with them. And there are so many parents who've never done that with their kids. And that's why we tell them there are a lot of resources on it. We had the Bible storybook by Edgar Meyer. That's still in print, believe it or not. It's a wonderful book, and it gives you a lot of the details of God's Word. We also had the picture Bible, the comic Bible, the comic strip that looked like comics, but they're well drawn, and you go through the stories of the Bible. And when our kids went off to Moody Bible Institute, having had years of devotions and going through books like that in church and all, they were shocked when they got there how many of the students had no idea of the stories of the Bible. They had no idea. They hadn't heard these things. And that's interesting. In our Bible study, we're in Genesis right now. And in our Bible study with them, there are some of those people I can see, like our little Catholic lady, we're telling stories they've never heard before, and they're just fascinated. Oh, they just sit there with their mouth open because they've never heard it. So we need to instruct them and to impress them upon our children. Talk about them when you sit at home, maybe in the morning before they go, or tonight when they come home. When you walk along the road, some of our best times in spiritual discussions were when we would take our kids out and walk beside the canal and just talk. And I remember our son saying to us at one time, I don't know how anyone could see what God has made and not believe that there is a God. And we would talk about things like that. So when you walk along the road, when you lie down before they go to bed at night, and you tuck them in, have prayer. We would instruct our children when they were very young. We would teach them how to pray and follow after me. And I would say that, and then they would repeat the words. They would learn to pray and what it's all about. And when you lie down and when you get up in the morning, to teach them about rejoicing in the Lord. So that's just a brief outline of that passage. We're going to come down. I'm just going to finish real quick then, Mama. Okay. There's God's blueprint for parenting is to love your children. Love your children. There are some parents that are just not loving to their children. And they may love them in their heart, but they don't know how to express love. We knew a family where they never expressed the words, I love you, to their children. Now the children knew that their parents loved them, but they never heard those words from them. And I grew up in a home where every time we came through the door, hi, son, I love you. And when we go off to school, goodbye, have a great day, I love you. And that's just part of our vocabulary. And I think that's sad when they don't hear those words. In Psalm 103, verse 13, as a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. A father, if he is a loving father, really does have compassion on his children and their foolishness, their inability to think things through when they're little and they don't understand certain words, and you want to teach them that, and they'll ask you, what does that word mean? It's so easy for us to, or you have a project and they don't know how to do it. And it's so easy to say, what's wrong with you? Everybody knows how to do that. Well, they don't know how to do that unless you show them and can help them with that, but they can feel embarrassed. I remember as a child not knowing a particular word and asking the meaning of that. I just felt embarrassed that I didn't know the meaning. Well, I didn't know it. Then we find in Isaiah 49, verse 15, can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has born? Well, the answer is they shouldn't, but there are mothers in our world today who have no compassion for their children and have no problem aborting, have no problem giving their children away. I told you about the Ugandan missionary's daughter who has found two little boys in the ditch about to drown, and she saved them, and her parents have now adopted, what's his little Jojo, what's his name? Adopted him, and I think they're probably going to adopt the second one as well that she has saved. But what happens in Africa, many times women have no way to support their children, and one way that they have is through prostitution or marriage. And if they have a child, the guys don't want to marry them because they don't want to support a child. So in a case like that, out of desperation, women may just give their child away or throw the child away. And it's just hard to believe. Titus 2, verse 4, train the younger women to love their husbands and children. It tells us in Ephesians chapter 5 that women are to respect their husband, but here it says they are to love their husbands and children. And they're told, the husband is told in Ephesians chapter 5 to love his wife. And it's not just a romantic love, it is a caring love for every part of their life. We are to discipline our children. Proverbs 13, verse 24, this is probably the most politically incorrect thing I can say, but I'm sorry. It says here, he who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is careful to discipline him. I'm not talking about, and I try to explain to people, I'm not talking about beating your child. I'm not talking about being harsh or cruel and laying stripes on them and just being hateful. I'm saying that they need to be spanked. And I have been told, we'll never spank a child with your hand because they'll always fear your hand. That is nonsense. I'd far rather spank a child with my hand than a stick, because you can tell how hard you're hitting them in the rear end. By the way, I always tell parents, never hit your child in the face. Never slap their face. The face is the closest that we have to represent our soul. Nothing else comes close. But our face, our eyes, our expression, that represents our soul. And it shows total disrespect to slap a child. God has made our anatomy such that he's made a perfect spanking place. It's padded, but it also has a lot of nerve endings. And that's what God intended to a certain extent for that. But I would be very careful. We've taught parents also, don't do it publicly. Don't do it publicly. Our daughter was one time at a grocery store, and her son was in rebellion. I mean, he was just a little fellow at the time. What was it, 2, 3, something like that? And he was just throwing a fit. So she left her little wagon there in the store, the cart, and took him outside. She said, "You're going to get it." You know, I'm gonna. And as she was going to discipline him, she looked up, saw a camera, a big camera in the parking lot. And I think we had said, don't discipline in public because you never know that someone might report you. And she didn't. I'm telling you, it is something today. You have so many parents who are twisted by this world. They think it is more compassionate not to discipline your child. But I'm telling you, it is far more compassionate to train your child early on and to discipline them in an appropriate way, but to discipline them so that the police don't have to do it and the courts don't have to do it.
We and I recommend it to the couples that I work with, we use for discipline some materials that were put out by Doorpost Ministry. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
No, I'm not.
But one super helpful thing for me, because we didn't really know how to really know about the best way to spank people, So we had a chart that basically, I think it was like 10 categories of things. Would be lying, fighting with your siblings or whatever. And then Janice and I were able to kind of categorize what we thought a reasonable number of swats would be for that. And lying was, I think, 10 swats. Went around at church was 8, but actually fighting with your brother, hitting your brother was pretty low. It was only like 2 because it just happened all the time. Because that's the way the siblings were. But in our home right now, we have a guest bathroom, and inside that guest bathroom on the back of the door was where we put that chart. And so it was basically like, you do this, and there's a Bible verse, and here's a consequence. We would work through that process of like, this is how you sin, this is how you repent, this is the punishment. And sometimes we would step in and teach that principle of grace. I'm not looking ahead, I don't know if you're going to get there, but we would often do like, hey, sometimes when we do things, God doesn't zap us.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to teach that principle of love and grace too, but it was always this unique place in the house. It gave me the opportunity to know exactly what was coming. The kids knew exactly what was coming, and it always pointed us back at the Lord or Scripture and grace. It was super helpful for us.
And I think you want to avoid embarrassing a child in front of others.
Yeah.
If the other children you're playing with, if you have to discipline a child, I'd call them inside. Yeah. One exception for that is if they are disrespectful in front of their friends, disrespectful to the parent in front of friends. That's when I correct them publicly. And I've explained that to them. I said, you did this publicly, and I'm telling you, don't do that. But it's a very dangerous thing to discipline carelessly. I did a program on this, the radio broadcaster used to have, and I taught about corporal punishment and the pros and cons and how to go about it reasonably. Somebody, this radio station was in Wisconsin, and somebody heard that and called social services out here and said that we were abusing, or that our children, our son-in-law and daughter they were abusing our grandchildren. And so social services showed up at our door and he said, we need to examine your grandchildren. We've heard that you guys are very cruel with your children. And he said, I'm so sorry. He says, I have to do this. And it was done anonymously. I said, you mean you react to something like this with an anonymous call? He said, yeah, we have to, no matter what. So we came in and they checked out our grandchildren, they checked out below their diapers and all this to see if there wasn't even a bruise Well, I'm so thankful to the Lord that they hadn't fallen that day, and bruised themselves. And it was just perfect. He said, no problem, we're done. And we never heard any more about it. But I just think how there are so many people who are ready to jump in and to say, okay, we're going to spare your children from this wrath.
But he said it would be on our record.
No, I don't.
For 10 years, didn't he?
On their record as parents, not ours, but
okay.
But I don't know how long it was, but he said, I'm not even certain what he did. I don't know. I'm not certain. But we never heard anything more about it. So discipline your children according to God's word, not with cruelty. Provide for your children. 1 Timothy 5, verse 8, if anyone does not provide for his relatives, especially for the immediate family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. This is where, as the days become more difficult in the days ahead, there are going to be a lot of financial problems for the elderly and for the parents. And it is the responsibility at that point for the children to take care of their parents. And some would say, well, that's just not fair. It may not be fair, but that's God's command that we're to do that. So otherwise, it's like a pagan, he says. And then train your children diligently and intentionally. That's from Deuteronomy 6, 1 through 7, where it tells us to teach God's word, his commands, laws, decrees, the responsibility of parents in verse 7, teaching reverence for God in verse 2, teaching obedience in verse 3, teaching correct theology in verse 4, personal love for God in verse 5, teaching personal relationship with God in verse 6, and teaching intentionally. That's continual instruction in eternal matters, impressing biblical truth in their hearts and using daily activities to teach eternal truths. And there's so much material that is available for them. So Marla has done a lot of research, and I want her to be able to share from this point on some of the things that she has found. So, Mama, come on up.
I feel like I'm kind of talking to the choir. Does that make sense? Is that the phrase? I create phrases myself, but I think that's the phrase. But we want to talk a little bit about the training. I can get to my notes. Thank you. Okay. So train up a child in a way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. I think it's a great verse, and a lot of people think it's a promise. This is a principle. It's not exactly a promise as some would take it. And when they think it's a promise, that relieves them of the responsibility of discipline or being irresponsible parents. So I just wanted to make that clarification. Some would say that as long as you read your children right, and you take them to church once or twice a week, you don't need to worry if at some point they sow a few wild oats. I think that's an old term, but I respond with, really? I'm not a farmer, but I read that old wild oats shed their seeds before harvest, and they'll cause a lot of damage to the wheat crop. And so it is very destructive to have that kind of a mindset. And then I wonder, what if Jesus had had this mindset? What if he had just taken his disciples to the synagogue once a week for about an hour or so? Would they have ever had any practical teaching or just a description of it? Or would they have seen any real moments of compassion? The woman being caught in adultery and the father of the demon-possessed son. Or would there just be only imaginary moments fixed on the scrolls of papyrus? Would they have ever seen any excited crowds or ever heard sermons on the mountainsides or even witnessed the miracles at the tombs? So just think of it, Jesus standing at the temple teaching for 1 hour and the disciples sitting there, and that's how they were taught? I don't think so. Fortunately, the disciples saw Jesus pray. They witnessed him reaching out to the lepers, touching them, feeding the hungry, driving the money changers out of the temple. It was one life rubbing off another. It was a demonstration to the disciples how this life worked. And so my question is, as a parent, and I have asked myself, what am I teaching? What am I demonstrating to my children and to my grandchildren? Have they witnessed reaching out to the hungry, to the poor, the down and out, taking meals to the sick, cleaning a house for an invalid, repairing a home for free, taking your sons with you for accountability and training them at the same time? I have to tell you, I have to give this illustration. We have a son-in-law. He's very gifted in maintenance. In fact, he's one of the head maintenance guys at Ball. And there was a time at our former church where people did not know, but he would go to the widows' homes and to the young mothers, single moms who had needs, and he would take his kids with him, his two sons, I think, and go and fix whatever their need. A lot of times he'd go and buy the supplies, show up there and teach, use it as a teaching for his kids to learn how to do plumbing, how to do electrical. When we moved into our home a couple of years ago, it was our grandkids that did all the tiling in the bathroom, on the floor, and in the shower. And they did the plumbing. And I think they helped with electrical, but there are certain things he wouldn't let them do that are a little dangerous. But so this is a skill. I know we have some skilled men here, very skilled men, and what an opportunity to take those moments to train your kids in the basics of life. How about ministering at the jail? Now, I know kids can't go to the jail, but Linda and I used to go to the jail when we were allowed to, once a week. We went to Adams County and taught the women there. And I don't mean to embarrass her, but I'll tell you what, she articulated to those women, because of her background, they could relate to her teaching and her empathy of where they were, because she would tell them, I should be here. My lifestyle, I should have been here, but God took me out of it and he saved me. Those women would listen to her more than they would listen to me. I saw it. I'm sorry, Linda, if I embarrassed you. I'm really sorry. How about feeding the homeless? Tri-City does a great job with the food bank, but are you helping out with the food bank? What about visiting the shut-ins or befriending an elderly widow or widower? Get your kids involved in this. Help them to see this is part of what we do as believers in Christ. So the question is, are they seeing you live it out, obeying the principles and the clear instructions of God's word? And what's your attitude like? When you're doing it, are you doing it with resentment, or are you doing it with enthusiasm? Are you doing it as a service as unto the Lord? What are your actions like? Do your actions match your words? Are you deliberate? Are you authentic in your walk with the Lord? Loving God to the point that they want the same thing that you have. That's the goal. And here's a tough question. If their eternity depended on your life, would they have a chance? That's a fair question. It's a tough question. And frankly, I'll have to say there are moments in looking back that, no, I'm probably not. But God in his mercy overrides when we confess our sins. I want to just tell you that as a mother, I regretted doing a few things with the children. I'm not going to do any details. It wasn't anything illegal or anything like that, but just basically attitude issues. And I was grieved about it to where I prayed and asked God, could you just erase those things from their mind so they're not hindered in their walk with you? And I prayed fervently about it. I never told the kids. And years later, we were discussing some things, and I said, do you remember? And none of them remembered. I just think that was a God thing. And I just want to throw that out to you. If you feel like you have failed miserably, and ask God to remove it from their hearts and their minds, and not allow it to be a stumbling block, okay? So let's look at the phrase that train up. Originally, it referred to the palate, the roof of the mouth, and the gums. And the verb form, the word depicted placing a rope in the mouth of a wild horse, taming it so it could receive direction. That's one picture of it. The other picture is of a midwife, which she'd get the baby, she would dip her fingers into the juice of crushed dates and then rub it over the newborn baby's palate to create the desire for sucking. And then she'd hand the baby to the mother to nurse it, and the mother to nurse it. So that's kind of the picture. So I believe that's the role as a parent, is not only to tame and direct our child's will, but to create a thirst for the nourishment of our kids through God's word by living it out before them, to be an example of godly wisdom and godly counsel. But you can't give them what you don't have. I mean, that's a given. And so the question comes back, what do you have to give them? Do they see you reading the Bible? Do they see you praying? Do they see you living biblical principles throughout the day when conflicts come? When they come home from school or wherever with a troubled heart, disappointments, bullying, temptations they face, whatever it is, do you try to act like Jesus with them in a loving response? Listen to them. Listen, you don't have to make a comment or a counsel every time. Sometimes you just need to listen. Sometimes cry with them and pray with them. Love on them. Are you giving them the truth about the challenges they will face? I actually did part of this lecture when we were in Romania a couple of years ago, and I asked them at that time, I asked my kids, because I'm so out of date with what's going on, because I'm a little old, if they would help me and write for me their concept of what their parenting goals would be. And this is one from one of my son-in-law's belief. He said, I believe home is where God can be comfortably discussed in any conversation at any time. But that means living authentic, godly lives of faith. Passing on those truths to our children and grandchildren is not only for their good, it is for their survival. It's a matter of life and death, and all the more as you see the days getting darker and darker. Will they know how to live if we have never lived it out before them? Can they see in us a joy, a genuine joy, in the midst of difficult health and financial issues? At that time, he was battling cancer, disfiguring cancer on his face. And then he writes, has their faith been strengthened because of my diligence to pray for them? Whether you are old or young, the truth is, unless we deliberately choose ourselves to be obedient to this commandment of God, we will become an endangered species, and the generations that follow will be weaker and fewer as times get tougher and tougher. So the most profitable method for impacting God's truth is with lives, how we live it. I asked another one, a daughter, about her response, and I was interested more in the technical things she was using. Her children were using electrical devices and stuff, and this is what she wrote. Naturally, during and throughout the day, not just before bed, it means controlling their hours before the TV or their computer toys and gadgets that distract them from the important lessons of life. She suggests parental controls on which they have, and they still have that. This was several years ago. They use Norton Family Parental Controls, which allows you to monitor every single online activity for your children. They are able to limit their time on the computer or any mobile device. If they exceed their time, the device is disabled and the parent is alerted by text and email. It's able to block websites or apps that you don't want your children to utilize. It allows the child to message the parent for permission to access a site. The parent then has to manually unlock the site. If a child tries to set up an additional account, the parent is alerted. If a child is messaging or in chat rooms, parent is alerted. Question for you. Oh, the parent is alerted. Sorry, I didn't put a period there. And by the way, her kids are 18, and she has twins that are 16. The 18-year-old, they just released this control over his computer and his phone. But the 16-year-olds still are, they're twins, they still live under these rules, and they're homeschooled. So every now and then they have to call because they can't access the materials because it may have a bad word or something in it, and they have to call and get mom and dad to release that site or whatever for them to get their homework done. But this is her thoughts, and I agree with them, and I think it's good for you to hear. If child is messaging or in chat rooms, oh no, wait, I just did that. Sorry, I'm an old lady, okay? Would you allow your child to access a gun or any other weapon without teaching them how to properly use it? Of course not. Because you want to protect them and keep them safe. It's the same with online access. Why would you allow your child to have access to something so dangerous without training them how to use it wisely and in a godly manner? The internet is useful, but is also extremely dangerous. This includes gaming consoles as well. If your child uses the Wi-Fi or gaming device or console, they have access to the internet. Did you know that many of them come with things like YouTube already loaded on them? When they play games online, they are able to connect and talk with other players that your kids now know nothing about. They become, quote, friends, and we have chosen to monitor what our kids are doing online. Our kids play online with their dad so that he can monitor any online discussions. And there have been incidences when their friends have become vulgar and began cursing. And because of their dad was online with them, he was able to quickly get them off and unfriend these people. It is our intention to protect them because they are a gift from God to us. Our goal is to bring them up in the things of God and to train them to live in a fallen world in a way that still brings glory to the Lord. They don't have to have all the latest gadgets. They don't need a smartphone. They need parents who care about them and are available to them. Our kids do have a cellular phone, but online access is totally disabled. They are only able to add friends that we've approved, not because we're trying to control their lives, but we are invested in protecting them and helping them make wise choices now, so they will make wise and godly choices when they're on their own. I don't ever want to give my child a device that will lead them into temptation that they are not prepared to resist, only to allow it to explode in their faces and lead them down a path to a life-dominating sin like pornography, sexual immorality, and so forth. So let's look at the biblical perspective of some of these life-dominating sins. What is the biblical perspective of sex? And I think I have this in your notes, is to keep from hurting ourselves. Sexual desires and activities must be placed under God's control. In 1 Thessalonians 4, 3-5, the scriptures tell us that God wants you to be holy and pure, to keep clear of all sexual sin, so that each of you will marry in holiness and honor, not in a lustful passion as the heathen do in their ignorance of God and his ways. Sex is forbidden by the Bible, by the seventh commandment, forbidding adultery. You shall not commit adultery. Sexual sin is destructive, even when the effects are not immediately apparent. 1 Corinthians 6:18 says that is why I say to run from sex sin. No other sin affects the body as this one does. And when you sin, this sin, it is against your own body. How does sexual sin begin? Matthew 5:28 tells us Anyone who even looks at a woman with lust in his eye has already committed adultery with her in his heart. The Bible also condemns homosexual behavior because of this. That's Romans 1:26 and 27. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lust. Even their women exchanged natural relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed indecent acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their perversion. The Bible also forbids incest. Leviticus 18:6. No one is to approach any close relative to have sexual relationship. Bible forbids bestiality. Leviticus 18:23. Do not have sexual relations with an animal and defile yourself with it. By the way, this is something that's going on. I don't need to go there, but it's disgusting. Anyways, the Bible forbids sexual relations with a prostitute. 1 Corinthians 5:15 through 17. Don't you realize that your bodies are actually parts and members of Christ? So should I take part of Christ and join him to a prostitute? Never. And don't you know that if a man joins himself to a prostitute, she becomes a part of him and he becomes a part of her? For God tells us in the scripture that in his sight, the two become one person. Some of these are in the Living Bible, and I put them in deliberately because children don't always understand King James, or it's something that they need to grasp for themselves in the teaching process. So this is not a comfortable subject, but I just need to tell you, you as a parent need to be aware of what your kids are seeing or hearing about if they're going to public school or even here at church. Don't think because you come to a church, a good Bible church, that there aren't those here who are participating in this kind of stuff. I wish I could tell you 100% never happens, but it's been our experience, and it does happen, and it happens too much. There's too many men, women even now, involved in pornography. According to Barna Research, which is a Christian research group, at least 67% of men ages 13 and up are using it for personal arousal. Some are using it for boredom, others curiosity, and then there's others that just use it for fun. So you need to be aware of what your kids are looking at if they're at home with you. And if you let them go over to somebody's house, that is a critical decision. Our kids, bless their hearts, they've been looked at as controlling parents, but there's been too many sleepovers with good kids from good homes, from a great church, who've gotten themselves into trouble because mom and dad went to sleep and they just started doing things they shouldn't have been doing. Okay, I won't say anymore. Anyways, let's talk about child abduction. That is going to affect you as a family if you have young children. I hate to be telling you that this past year, our daughter, up at the orchard, was with her 16-year-old granddaughter, and they're in one of the stores just casually shopping. And she noticed there were three men kind of strategically sat around the store watching her daughter. And so she kept her eye on it and kind of pretended like she was shopping. And her daughter moved to another area, and those men started coming in. And she saw it, and she moved quickly and took her daughter and went up to the manager and went to report that, and those men left the store. It scares me what's happening these days. I'm not trying to scare you, but be protective of your kids when they go to the bathrooms. She has a son that goes to the bathroom, and when he was younger, she would stand outside the bathroom door and give him a certain amount of time and then call him, not his name, just call him, hey, bud. and call him, are you okay? I'm waiting for you, or that sort of thing. She wanted to know if there was any perpetrators in the bathroom. The mother was standing outside, and they weren't going to get her kid. That was her way of protecting him. Same thing happened with the daughter, but she would go in the bathroom with the daughter. By the way, God forbid that this would ever happen to anybody that we know. But the FBI recommends being prepared with a child ID app, and that allows you to store photos and physical descriptions of your child on your smartphone. If your child ever goes missing, you can use the app to quickly send information to the authorities. The FBI does not store or collect the photos or information you enter into the app. The data lives on your device unless you choose to send it to the police in an emergency. So just keep that in mind. It's called Child ID app. What about sex trafficking? Why would we even have to talk about this? Sex trafficking is prevalent. It's a tragedy that is taking place every day, regardless of race or material comfort. Over 300,000 children are exploited in the U.S. each year. The average when children are trafficked is 11 and 12-year-olds. That's when they start, the ones who want. It may surprise you. The most trafficking is done in Highlands Ranch and Colorado Springs. I talked to a man who was in some leadership in this business of rescuing them. And I said, you're going to be kidding me. He said, all you need is men and money. That's what it's all about. By the way, there is a group called Innocence Restored, and I think I have that in your notes. And I have met with leaders from that. The leaders are two young mothers, precious young mothers, who really put themselves in jeopardy. And now they have a bigger team. What they do is they go and help. They work with the police, state police, and rescue these girls. And they bring with them a backpack with a change of clothes, a teddy bear, a blanket, and a book to read, and hygienic materials and that sort of thing. But their whole purpose in making that initial contact, working along with the FBI and the police, is for the girls to associate with them, and their goal is to do Bible study with them and to help them move out of the pain of their journey they've just been in. They are sweet, sweet girls. By the way, several years ago, Colorado was number 3 in sex trafficking. And it's because we have a north-south I-25 and east-west I-70, and they can escape quickly. So, so I was wondering, what is the difference between abducting or kidnapping and human trafficking? And this is the explanation I found. Kidnapping refers to taking someone away illegally against their own ransom. Human trafficking, usually, I'm not saying it right, I'm twisting my words, I'm sorry. They're taken away illegally against their will, usually for ransom. Human trafficking refers to illegally trading a person for either exploitation or commercial gain. Oftentimes, human traffickers force victims into labor or prostitution. According to Homeland Security, human trafficking is the second largest profitable transnational national crime. Human trafficking is spreading so quickly because of its low risks and high profits. And every year, human trafficking produces billions of dollars in profit. I don't want to talk about cyber sex and phone sex. I don't want to know a whole lot about it, but I will tell you this. The Bible doesn't say anything about that. Those gadgets weren't available when the scriptures were written, but what was written is that what you are supposed to think on whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable. If anything is excellent or praiseworthy, that's what we're supposed to think about. These cyber sex and whatever, that's not what they do. I don't want to go, I got more stuff here, but I don't want to go into it. I'm sorry. Let's talk about the truth about abortion. If you're uncomfortable talking with your kids about abortion, perhaps you need to look at the movie Unplanned. You can buy it on Amazon for about $9. You can find out information by reading this big book called Pro-Life Answers to Pro-Choice Arguments by Randy Alcorn. I had to read this as part of my assignment of getting my master's degree, and I hated that book. I could only read a few paragraphs and have to put it down because it was so graphic. It was horrible. I just put it down, and I have the television. I had a time frame. I had to get this book done. I had the TV on something that I was interested in. So I put it down and watched that for a few minutes, and then pick up another, read a couple more paragraphs. And then that's how I got through the book. I probably didn't get as much from it as I should have, but that's the only way I could handle that book. But if you want information about that industry, by the way, you go online and there are lies after lies after lies. I looked it up this week. Planned Parenthood and all these different organizations are disputing the fact that, listen to this, women with one abortion double their risk of cervical cancer compared to non-aborted women, while women with 2 or more abortions multiply their risk nearly 5 times. Similar elevated risks of ovarian and liver cancer have also been linked to single and multiple abortions. There's a doctor in New York said the single most avoidable risk for breast cancer is induced abortion. A woman who has an abortion increases her risk of breast cancer by a minimum of 50% and as much as 300%. Is it any wonder that our nation has had a lot of people, a lot of women with breast cancer? That's all my only comment. That's all my personal opinion. Some women are unable to conceive after having abortions. And we know a lady who has a great ministry who had an abortion when she was about 18 and never ever to have children after that. Abortion increases the risk of malformations of later children. I'm not going to go into what is abortion. If you've got teenagers and they're going to public school, this subject may be something you need to do the research so you can talk intelligently with them. Just quickly understand that abortion involves burning, smothering, dismembering, and crushing. And that's all I'm going to say about that, okay? So you need to know these things so you can talk with your kids with some knowledge. And our 18-year-old grandson and one of the twins, 16-year-old, came over today. And I had an opportunity to talk to him. I said, Marshall, what are you seeing in your friends as the biggest problem? And he said, probably the biggest problem is depression and suicide. And I don't think I put that in your notes. And he's in what they call Gen Z, Generation Z, I guess. But there's 36,000 millennials that died of suicide from depression, whatever, in 2017 because of overdose. And then Gen Z, according to the information I was looking up, and anymore you can't really trust everything you're reading. So it indicated their generation is even higher. And I think the perspective they had was interesting, that the report argues that there are also issues that plague the millennials, including financial stresses stemming from student loan debt, healthcare, high housing costs, and get this, fewer people taking part in faith and community-based organizations. Interesting that these secular companies would even mention that. I can't help but think when scripture tells us in Romans 1:21, although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. They need hope. They need love. They need Jesus. They don't need my tearing them down. They need a touch of Jesus in their lives. I have to say, in 53 years of ministries, the kids that came from nominal Christian families left church. They never saw it lived out in their homes, and it breaks my heart to think of them. I can see some of their faces. I don't remember all their names. We rub shoulders with these kids, and they're gone. They left. Is it the parents' fault? I don't know. But it breaks my heart. We were there trying to minister. Yes, we had youth pastor, we had Sunday school teachers, we had all the right things. And they didn't get it, or they walked away from it. Only God knows what was in their heart. I want to just tell you that the scriptures tell us it's going to be tough. Understand this, that in the last days, there will come times of difficulty. And this is what we're seeing. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness but denying its power. That's 2 Timothy 3. Micah warns us that in times that the son treats the father with contempt, the daughter rises up against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against the mother-in-law, and a man's enemies are the men of his own home. But as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation, and my God will hear me. Luke 12 warns us that, do you think that I have come to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. And from now on, in one house, there will be 5 divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And we are seeing it. We are seeing it. We are seeing it here in church. You don't need to know any more than that. But we were in contact with a family, I think Ed spoke a little bit about it, of a family who their daughters haven't had anything to do with them for 5 years, 7 years, and they have 20 grandkids they haven't seen. And they are in touch with 40 families who are being affected by this kind of mentality. So is it the child's fault? Is it the parents' fault? Only God knows. But I want to read this as an encouragement to you. This was written by a parent. I gave you life, but I cannot live it for you. This really ministered to my heart, okay? I can teach you things, but I cannot make you learn. I can give you directions, but I cannot be there to lead you. I can allow you freedom, but I cannot account for it. I can take you to church, but I cannot make you believe. I can teach you right from wrong, but I can't always decide for you. I can buy you beautiful clothes, but I cannot make you beautiful inside. I can offer you advice, but I cannot accept it for you. I can give you love, but I cannot force it upon you. I can teach you to share, but I cannot make you unselfish. I can teach you respect, but I cannot show honor. I can advise you about your friends, but I cannot choose them for you. I can advise you about sex, but I cannot keep you pure. I can tell you the facts of life, but I cannot build your reputation. I can tell you about beverage, alcohol, but I cannot say no for you. I can warn you about drugs, but I cannot prevent you from using them. I can tell you about lofty goals, but I cannot choose them for you. I can teach you about kindness, but I cannot force you to be gracious. I can warn you about sin, but I cannot make you moral. I can teach you the 10 Commandments, but I cannot make you follow them or obey them. I can remind you of the first commandment with a promise, but I cannot make you honor your father and your mother. I can love you as a child, but I cannot place you in God's family. I can pray for you, but I cannot make you walk with God. I can teach you about Jesus, but I cannot make Jesus your Lord. I can tell you how to live, but I cannot give you eternal life. All of the above are your choices. One last thought, please. Don't, and these are not my words, don't feel sorry for or fear for your kids, because the world they are going to grow up is not what it used to be. God created them and called them for the exact moment in time that they're in. Their life wasn't a coincidence or an accident. Raise them up to know the power they walk in as children of God. Train them up in the authority of his word. Teach them to walk in faith, knowing that God is in control. Empower them to know they can change the world. Don't teach them to be fearful and disheartened by the state of the world, but hopeful that they can do something about it. Every person in all of history has been placed in the time that they were in because of God's sovereign plan. He knew Daniel could handle the lion's den. He knew David could handle Goliath. He knew Esther could handle Haman. He knew Peter could handle persecution. And he knows that your child can handle whatever challenge they face in their life. He created them specifically for it. Don't be scared for your children, but honor that God chose you to parent the generation that is facing the biggest challenges of our life. Rise up to the challenge. Raise Daniels and Davids and Esthers and Peters. God isn't scratching his head wondering what he's going to do with this mess of a world. He has an army, and he's raising up to drive back the darkness and make him known all over the earth. Don't let your fear steal the greatness God placed in them. I know it's hard to imagine them as anything besides our sweet little babies, and we just want to protect them from anything that could ever be hard on them. But they were born for such a time as this.
Well, hopefully, God gives you an opportunity. You'll be able to share some of these things with those who come. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for the privilege we have of gathering together. And I pray that you'd use each of us in the lives of others who are struggling with raising their children, and we'd be able to encourage them. And we'll thank you, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thank you, folks, for coming. Thank you for your attention. I know this is longer than usual, but that's a pretty heavy topic.